So let me start with you, Stephanie, as a plastic producer. Let's go like upstream to downstream. And from the production side of the plastic supply, what can we do, or what is Dow doing to enhance circularity and increase recyclability of plastic?
Yeah, no, excellent question. I think first, for those of you who don't know who Dow is, it's a leading material science company. So we're across all different types of materials, plastics and chemicals, serving mostly the major market verticals, right? So infrastructure, consumer, mobility, and packaging. So when we think about the role that we play as a plastics producer, it starts from the very beginning in terms of how we actually make the plastic. And what we're really looking at is a couple things. If you fundamentally think about circularity we view as an enabler of decarbonization, both via having alternatives in terms of technology. So we'll talk a little bit later. You've heard throughout the day also about chemical recycling, mechanical recycling. So taking the product and putting it back into a product. That is avoiding incineration or other alternatives that would have otherwise been the end of life. We're also looking at ways that we can bring new technologies to help hard to recycle materials to be recyclable. And that starts all the way at the beginning. So from the design of a resin for the first thing, making sure that we actually have products that are designed with the end in mind, making sure that it can come back into the cycle, and also looking at materials so that we can minimize the amount of materials used to ensure that recyclability is possible. That's really the first step. And then I think it's a whole suite of other things, because we know, at least from a decarbonization standpoint, circularity is not going to get us there by itself. So if you look at what Dow is doing to lead the industry, we're actually announced the first of its kind integrated ethylene and derivative site in the Fort Saskatchewan, Canada, which will be the first net zero integrated site to exist. And that's actually going to be able to allow us to produce, even with fossil fuels, net zero products that serve the demand from our customers, really. And if we all remember why we're doing this, not only because it's good for the planet and good for the people, but this is what consumers are demanding. So if you look at the demand brands, every brand has a commitment for circular low carbon products between 2030 and 2050. Dow's also made a commitment to net zero by 2050. So really it's first, how do we close the loop, design for recyclability? How do we bring those things back in, which is complex. You heard about partnerships a lot today. It's definitely essential as we move to a circular economy. And then also, how do we help advance the planet with good business?
Perfect, and that also goes well with my next question. I was going to you, Kris, and it was about if you first how to reduce plastic consumption in packaging, and also if that move to make more sustainable packaging face some resistance from consumers they want the old package, or they resist to change.
No, it's hugely topical for the fleet of brands that Reckitt owns. For those of you not familiar with Reckitt, we own FMCG brands across health, hygiene and nutrition sectors, including brands you may know such as Finish dishwasher tablets, Nurofen analgesics. So packaging is a huge part of our portfolio, and plastic is one of our biggest materials that we use in packaging. And we're basically aligning our ambitions around the waste hierarchy. So we're really trying to reduce that plastic right upstream where we can. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. One is by simply making components lighter, whether that's through kind of right weighting to make sure that we've got the perfect amount of material to give the properties that we need from our packaging in the value chain and the supply chain. Whether that's reducing things like headspace that may have crept up over years as we've adjusted fill levels, but it's also embracing new technologies such as foaming technologies to help us deliver the same strength but with less polymer used in each of our components. We are trying to embrace reuse. You may have seen some of our reuse solutions on the market for brands like Sillet Bang and Dettol, trying to engage with consumers to maintain their original trigger spray bottle but refill with a concentrated solution which drastically reduces the amount of plastic that's used per reuse of that trigger, and preserves the use of those kind of components with lots of materials in them like sprays for 10, even 15 uses, which they're more than capable of delivering. So all of these ways are going to really kind of help us. And whilst plastics are the material that needs the kind of biggest leg up right now, and we've got targets around virgin plastic reduction and also incorporating more recycled content, so reducing our need for virgin plastics, we're also conscious of our other materials and how the usage of materials such as tin plate for aerosol cans, glass packaging in some sectors, and paper and board, particularly in the supply chain, as well as taking resources from the ground. They're also using putting carbon into the atmosphere. So by reducing on these materials as well, we're also aligning with our carbon reduction goals for 2030 and beyond.
Perfect. So you mentioned the need to use more recycled materials, and also like to improve the technology of the packaging. And I will ask you to use, Samantha, like how can we like boost recycling via like enhancing, like we need chemical or advanced technological methods?
Yeah, so I think there's a current recycling industry that exists that does a relatively good job when it comes to really simple, easy plastics. So, monolayer PET bottles, 100% PET items can easily go to mechanical recycling. I think the issue really comes in where you have multi-layer, where you have plastic that is exposed to maybe bleach or other chemicals that cannot go back into food contact items. And so this is where I think you need to have advanced chemical recycling, like the stuff that we do at DePoly, come in. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, and you might have heard it already in the talks today, so I apologize if I'm kind of repeating some things. At DePoly, we do chemical recycling for plastics. We convert ester-based, so PET, polyester, polyurethane, for example, back from the polymer to the main monomer. This is the monomers that would have originally been sourced by the oil industry, but now we're producing them from our waste instead of our natural resources. And you can use this to then make virgin quality plastic from our waste. So this is what I think is the next best option for tackling the recyclability issue that we have, because a lot of the stuff that we have day to day is, and you can look at the clothing that you're wearing, the carpet, the chairs you're sitting on, this is all much more complex than the current recycling system can deal with.
And I will continue with you, Samantha. How, because like we recycle too little of the plastic we use, or how can we, is it an issue that we don't have the technology to recycle, as you just mentioned, or we don't have the infrastructure to recycle, or people, they don't care that much and they don't go with their PET bottle to the recycling point, or it's a combination of the three? How can we boost recycling rates?
I think consumers care. I think they want to do the best that they can, but they also want to see the tangible results that come out of this. And you can look at, I think, different markets also to see how consumers behave if they're given enough resources and like support, let's say, from the government. So recycling in Japan is very, very well organized. They can get those contents higher versus maybe North America, where we landfill a bunch of stuff because we just have the space to do it. But I think if you give people education, if you give them the resources, and then also if you invest in the future infrastructure, for example, like chemical recycling, then you can kind of hit all these pain points that we're currently seeing. I think it's a lot of, you might have to take a short-term risk now for long-term goals, but it has to be done to get recycling up to the standard that it should be.
But I do think that it's a bit of a combination, right? So if you look globally, I think only recycling rates are about 9% globally. In Europe, they're better, around 27%. However, 3 billion people around the world lack access to basic waste management. So infrastructure is a huge challenge, which is why as you transition to a circular economy, you really need to partner with people that you haven't conventionally partnered with in a linear model, right? So you need to start talking about waste management. You need to start recycling companies, sortation. It's not that the technology doesn't exist. I agree completely. I think it's really about ensuring that you have the supply to meet that demand. And you heard that theme throughout the day of, as you invest in solutions, having that reliability of the supply and kind of that chicken or egg, right? No. And so we really need policy as well that's well written to incentivize circularity, to bring the demand, to incentivize building up that infrastructure, so that as we invest in chemical recycling and other technologies, because there's a lot of technologies out there and we're going to need them all to make this transition, right? But it's going to take some time.
Yeah, there's definitely no single silver bullet. It is a combination of all those factors that you highlighted. Everybody's got a role to play. think policy, as you rightly said, it is massive. An extended producer responsibility as a mechanism to help fund some of this infrastructure development where there are significant gaps or where emerging technologies need that kind of step up to really help scale and provide a significant part of the solution is absolutely vital. I think you mentioned the consumer as well, and the consumer is not absolved of any responsibility here. We really need them to make sure that they're directing the waste in the right way. And certainly as a brand owner, we can help them with clear and consistent labelling, and we're going to see some of that under the packaging and packaging waste regulation in the EU, a harmonisation of that labelling, which helps us in terms of labelling across Europe, but also means that wherever you go, you're going to see that common language of how it's conveyed to the consumer and how it's even then labelled on waste receptacles to really help people understand this goes here, and that's going to help it get to the best place to be recycled.
Yeah. Perfect. And staying with you, Kris, and from the packaging perspective, what is the role to play in order to simplify the type of materials that you use, like to eliminate or to reduce the use of like complex multi-material laminates, for example? What is the role to play in order to improve like our recycling rates?
I think in a lot of places we really need to see the scale of the infrastructure to see almost the business case for changing. Right now we use some multi-material laminates because we need to, because we really need the properties that they present, and there's not the solutions available right now. We need technological innovation to unlock that. In other places we use materials because whilst they serve the purposes, ultimately they're not going to be recycled, whichever material we use in some parts of the world. So there's a kind of chicken and egg situation where we need infrastructure to be present, otherwise what's the stimulus for us changing materials for them not be recycled regardless? So there's a huge amount of partnership and collaboration needed to help find the right solutions technologically for material and then introduce them for products where they will be recycled in a circular fashion to enable us to use that content back into more of our packaging. But yeah, technological innovation and collaboration are absolutely vital again, and every presentation I think today has referenced both of those terms, but without both of them happening, we're not going to get solutions. There's no single partner that's going to kind of bring this alone. It's got to be a joint effort between everybody.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you, like, if you now are you like, do you work in partnership with like your consumers and like recyclers in order to make plastics that are easier to recycle or are more durable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the first step. So we have a target to be 100% recycled or recyclable by 2035. So all of the products that we produce should be able to close the loop. And how we do that, so an example, practical example, you're talking about multi-layer structures. I mean, the barrier properties that are required to go to mono-material are often challenging, but we have found ways through partnerships. So bringing in a brand owner, we worked with one who makes baby food pouches, Yogi, and worked with a film producer, worked with a printer, brought everyone together in what we call Pack Studios, which is our innovation center, so we can actually test different resins and materials and see what the properties can look like on real scale equipment, and use that as a platform. And we were able there to take what was a multi-layer, non-recyclable structure and turn that into a mono-material that does the same job. Sometimes you're compromising a little bit, whether it be a slightly shorter shelf life or something, but you're not giving up the food safety and the functionality that the original package demands. And by doing that, you're also preserving the low emissions that plastics bring in the first place, right? Because to do the same job that plastics does in a package, typically alternatives are emitting, 2 to 3 times the emissions of the plastic package to do the same job. So that's just one example. We've done the same thing with toothpaste tubes. You guys have probably seen now when you go buy toothpaste, it says, recycle me. Those used to have foil layers in between and you actually couldn't recycle a toothpaste tube. Now that's a fully recyclable structure. So we are working on how we close the loop from a design to enable recyclability at the beginning. But then we're also looking at technologies. We talked about chemical recycling. Dow recently announced an intent to do a joint development agreement with Procter & Gamble, looking at a technology called dissolution. So actually taking multi-material or household waste that's typically been hard to recycle and dissolve that back into the different components so that you can have multiple clean streams that can go back into a new product, right? So there's a lot of technologies evolving. So it's first designing for recyclability, which we've actually very successfully done, but it's a little bit of adoption. Sometimes it costs more, sometimes consumers have the resistance to change, but we're definitely well on that journey.
Sure. And just Stephanie, in the point of like DePoly, like thinking on like new technology for recycling, how do you manage innovation in plastic production and plastic components? Because probably you made an investment to recycle effectively some kind of like components, and then the industry changes. And how do you like move forward the curve on that process?
I think for us at least, we look at all plastics that we have to tackle, not just PET right now. This was kind of the, let's say, the more low-hanging fruit, because in terms of chemistry terms, it's the easier one to break down, but we do realize that polypropylene and the polyethylenes are a huge component of the packaging industry that need to be tackled. So we, and this is actually something we also spoke about today, is we always invest in R&D to stay ahead of the curve, because I think that's needed. But then if you can work with companies who can help you make that next level PET product, or can help, maybe you can collaborate with a group in a consortium style to help bring it to the next level. I think that's what needs to be done. This is no longer just a game of the first person to the market wins. This is now if it's a problem, we need to solve it, and we need to get the right actors and players at the table to overcome that, especially if regulatory issues are changing.
Perfect. We have a couple of questions from the public, and I would like to take them. The first one is more specific on plastic for packaging used in construction and machinery industry. But it is like, what alternative solutions are available to replace or improve the sustainability of plastic packaging used in construction and machinery industry? I don't know if you can take this one, Stephanie.
Yeah, I think that the key is really collection, right? So the plastics that are used in packaging in those spaces are actually usually monomaterial and pretty clean streams that are very valuable in the chain, right? So the key goes back to this whole transition to a materials ecosystem and a circular economy. If you can collect those materials, those are actually have very high performance characteristics that would be useful in other spaces, right? So getting the right waste stream to the right technology, getting the right waste infrastructure to collect, I think these are some of the basic pieces. I mean, an example, we have a partnership that we've announced with a company, a French recycler, Valoregen, and we're looking at co-locating mechanical recycling, which is kind of taking the material, and you could take packaging materials from these industries, blend them down, turn it back into a pellet, and put it back into a product, right? That's the most simple way to think about it. So co-locating mechanical and chemical recycling, where you take maybe a post-household waste that's multi-material, challenging to recycle, and you can put it through a process like DePoly. We have other processes, but putting those in the same roof to ensure that the right waste goes to the right technology and that you're giving the most value for that waste, right? So I think there's a lot of ways we can make it more sustainable by co-location, increasing efficiencies, and also getting the right waste to the right places is going to be key.
Perfect. Kris, I wanted to ask you something. Is there any trade-off between like the need to reduce plastic consumption and also the need to reduce food waste, for example, on the products that because you mentioned just mentioned that the plastic is a very good material to preserve certain things, and it has like a lot of like negative points. But how you as a packaging industry, how do you manage this trade-off between like we need to make this food to last as much as possible in the shelf of the supermarket, but also I don't want to use that much plastic, you know?
It's a major thing. Packaging has a purpose. It exists for a reason. I think Natalie on the last panel spoke very well about the fact that plastic is not evil. It's been made out to be this horrific material that we should all fear, but it's very, very good at doing the job that it does. The plastic and packaging industry has misused it in many ways over the years because it's cheap and it's easy to work with. And now it's about kind of bringing that back and ensuring that we're using it in the most efficient way And that's through reducing things like overwraps that are not necessary, through, as I mentioned at the start, making components lighter so that they have the minimum amount of plastic that's needed to serve the purpose. And yeah, it's about finding that balance between shelf life and between the properties that are required. And in some industries, that's going to mean quite a lot of packaging and not necessarily recyclable. If we think of the pharmaceutical industry, where we need drugs that have very sensitive APIs and a long shelf life that's needed to enable global supply chains, we have to use a lot of packaging and often complex multi-layered materials to give that protection against moisture and oxygen. Whereas for other products which have a shorter usage things, certainly things like food and beverage, which may be consumed before that piece of packaging has even made it back to somebody's home, it's about using the minimal amount of material and making sure that the disposal routes exist so that it doesn't leak to the environment and it doesn't become persistent waste.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. And let's go back to questions from the public. And will a single circularity KPI help for measuring plastic impacts as opposed to like many other KPI? If you have to choose one, which will be?
I'm not sure we're ever going to get to a single KPI, but we're already seeing collaboration in helping kind of harmonise KPIs. So the Ellen MacArthur Foundation are now working with CDP to kind of harmonise reporting standards, and also kind of taking into account things like the World Economic Forum's work on reuse to really make sure that everybody's reporting in a consistent way and that we're not reporting against hundreds of different metrics and different definitions. So there's a lot of great work going on there, but virgin plastic reduction for me is still the big one that's key because of the benefits it has in terms of decoupling plastic use from resource use and also supporting that carbon reduction element as well.
Yeah, and I think, that's part of what the International Global Plastics Treaty is working on, right, is a set of different boundaries and KPIs that different economies can use. I think one of the things I would say to answer that directly is there's not a one size fits all. Every geography, every country is at a different point in its maturity in terms of its ability to manage the infrastructure, the waste, just like we talked about a little bit earlier. So having one KPI could advantage one economy but disadvantage another. So it's really about having good policy that meets everybody where they are and having responsibility for each of those players to play an important role. We're also a big supporter of EPR. You need to have a good policy in place for EPR that's material agnostic, right? Because you don't want free riders. It needs to include all materials to ensure that we're able to get the right investments back into the system to be able to be successful. Right, so I don't think it can be a one-size-fits-all, but it can be a one framework, which is what we're hoping to get out of these INC negotiations that are still happening. But you need everybody at the table, right? You need the producing countries, you need the developing economies, you need everybody to be on the same page to really make progress in that direction.
I will take that question from the public and I will rephrase it a little bit on my own. But if we had to choose a single policy direction for doing increase the circularity of plastic or reduce plastic waste, what should it be? Should it be going to targets of recycled materials in a new bottle, for example, in new packaging, or to improve the composition of the plastic? What do you think it will be the best to increase the circularity in plastic consumption?
I already said I'm not picking one, but I think it's many of them. I support all of those things. I support increasing recycled content targets because it's going to spur the demand. It's going to incent consumer behavior. It's going to have companies make investments that they may have shied away from because it'll give them the guarantee that the demand will be there. EPR, supportive, right? I think so. I think it's going to take a collection, just like on innovation, it can't just be mechanical recycling or just be chemical. It's going to take a lot of solutions, some we haven't even dreamed up yet. I think it's interesting. I don't think it's intuitive to everyone that the integrated production of polyethylene today doesn't look exactly the same as when it very first started, right? So there is a scale mechanism and efficiencies that are going to come over time as we continue to progress and test different things.
We keep coming back to EPR, extended producer responsibility, but well-designed EPR it is the best policy position that kind of is going to create best circularity conditions. It's equitable because everybody pays their fair share based on what they place on the market. And if it's well designed, it means that the fee structures and the bonus and malus rates really reward the use of more sustainable materials and penalise those that kind of don't change their practices. So it really feels that when it's well implemented and well designed, is going to be the one that helps kind of capture as many of those different aspects of packaging and circularity as possible.
Perfect. And another question from the public, which is, what about eliminating single-use plastic? So like, what should we do with single-use plastic? I mean, I've been like hearing about the conversation about what to do with single-use plastic. I mean, like, one way is to eliminate them, but like, I'm sure they're very useful for many things. So what should we be doing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned it earlier when you were talking about plastics and what they enable in terms of some of your packages. I mean, plastics have played an instrumental role in food progress over the last 50 years. So in terms of food waste reduction by 50 to 90% in a lot of cases, depending on the type of package. You're also delivering clean drinking water to people with single use depending on how you define it, right? I think that there's often unintended consequences to certain bans. So always thinking through, what you don't want to do is have substitutions that are creating a worse outcome. But if there's things that have good substitutes, then it's something, we should explore. So I think it's always thinking holistically about the problem and not just looking at, we all, I think, can agree here that plastic pollution needs to stop, right? And that plastic has a value. So how you get there is going to be a combination of different things, but typically bans have unintended consequences that need to be thought through.
Yeah, the last thing we want to do is push people to another material as a knee-jerk reaction that may not necessarily be any better. If we look at those plastics that have some of the shortest usage cycles, such as, again, food and beverage, finding alternative ways of delivering the product, finding and promoting reuse solutions. I was talking to somebody from Danone last week just about their pilot they did at the Wimbledon tennis tournament with refillable water containers, and they had great success even for the first year of implementing in that closed environment of massively reducing single-use plastic in that situation. So it's really about trying these different techniques in these different environments and seeing what works best. We've seen plastic cup use and plastic carrier bag use decline because of the way that's been managed through charging for single-use carrier bags or incentivizing people to bring their own cup to a Starbucks store, for example. And I think finding these right mechanisms that are going to work in these different environments, and again, particularly focused on food and beverage where the shortest use cycles and the highest volume of single-use plastics exist.
Perfect. Yeah.
I think maybe on this, we should also keep in mind that we're in a very lucky place where we can drink water from the tap and we can fill up water bottles. And there's a lot of places in the world right now that do not have access, even in the US, to clean drinking water. And we do have to just keep in mind that there are people out here that do rely on single-use plastic. So whatever the solution is, as we discussed earlier, is not going to be a one-fits-all. There is no silver bullet, but we do have to take advantage of areas that have that ability to reduce single-use plastic to do it, while keeping the others safe and at least giving them good water, good food to drink without having it contaminated.
And a successful transition to a circular economy eliminates the concept of single-use. So if we're successful in that transition, we keep things in use for multiple lives.
We will know we made it when we don't have like more single-use plastic.
I agree.
Okay. I want to thank you all. It has been a great conversation. Yeah, thank you for